kind of feels the hair go up on the back of his neck, and he's wondering what's going on here, and he's looking at this kid, and he realizes this kid has solid black eyes. Now, Harold is very frightened, and he's just thinking. He doesn't say anything. He's just thinking, how fast can I run away from this kid? And almost as if in an act of mind reading, this child immediately responds to him and says, now don't you run away from me.
Entities, alien hybrids, perhaps some form of spirit seeking passage to another place. Or are they simply a modern urban legend born of the computer age? Across the world, there are a growing number of counts of strange black-eyed children. They appear on doorsteps, at car windows, hotel rooms. Their skin is pale and their mannerisms odd. And they all have one consistent request. They want to be invited inside. Stay tuned. When we come back, we'll explore the mystery of the black-eyed children. Welcome back to Coast AM. My name is Rob Simone, filling in for George Norrie. And we're about to bring on our second guest for the show, David Weatherly. He is someone who has been exploring the strange, the unknown for 35 years. His recent book is called Black-Eyed Children. David, welcome to Coast AM.
Good evening, Rob. How are you?
I'm great. How you doing?
I'm doing wonderful.
Well, this is a real mystery, and it's kind of creepy because there's something about children when they're alien and they're strange that just scares the hell out of people.
It's very creepy, and part of the aspect of this phenomena that's so strange is that there's a psychological component to it. Whenever you mix children in with the paranormal, it causes a great deal of unease with adults, and it's a hard thing for us to reconcile. It's one of the reasons that horror movies have been so effective utilizing children in, the role of something evil or demonic.
So how did you get started in this sort of niche area of ufology?
The first time I heard about the black-eyed children was in the late 90s, and it was when a few stories showed up in the early days of the Internet. At the time, it was kind of interesting, but it was right on that borderline where it could be urban legend, and I thought, well, this is curious, but all of these stories are kind of anonymous, and I sort of filed it away for future reference. A few years later, I met a gentleman who basically broke down and told me his story, and it was just kind of mind-boggling at the time. He was sort of a John Wayne character, prison guard, martial artist, real no-nonsense character, didn't believe in anything connected to the paranormal and thought it was all a joke. But, he knew what I did, and I've learned over the years that when you have those people around you that can't leave the topic alone, it's often because they're hiding something or they've got something that they want to open up about. And that was the case with this gentleman. His name was Paul, and he caught me one day having lunch and just opened up and told me his story. And it was about an encounter with a pair of these black-eyed kids. And they literally terrified him.
What happened?
He just couldn't reconcile it.
Well, what happened?
Well, what happened to Paul was that he came home from work, and he was home alone. His wife and child were out of town. So he was kind of enjoying the time alone. He thought he was going to anyway. He's in his kitchen making a sandwich, and he hears this long knocking, just continuous knocking. And as many of us would do, it gave him pause. He started thinking, wow, is it someone knocking at the door? Is it some other sound? Why didn't they use the doorbell? All the logical things. Paul goes to the door. He opens his front door, and there's two kids standing on his steps. Their heads are sort of pointed down, looking at the ground. And they're in the 10-year-old range. And when Paul opens the door, they say, hey, we just thought we'd stop in for a bit. And, of course, Paul is like, I don't think so. I think you guys have the wrong house. But he's already a little bit uneasy, and he's not even sure why. So as the dialogue unfolds, these kids are basically insisting, well, we'll just come in for a little bit anyway, just ask us in. Paul steps forward to get a better look at these kids because he's realizing they're not kids from his neighborhood. They're too old to be friends of his child. He wants to know what's going on here. When he moves forward, these kids look up and make eye contact with him. That's when he realizes their eyes are solid black. And we're not talking about just the pupil. The entire sclera is solid black. That's kind of enough to put Paul over the edge. He's gone from unease to, being really, really nervous. He slams the door on these kids and sort of leans against his door for a moment, walks across the room. He's pacing in the middle of his room, realizing that he's not just uneasy. He's actually really, really frightened. And he can't reconcile why. As he's trying to sort of shake that off, he looks up at his front door. It's one of those doors that is has a panes of glass around it in the frame. And peering through one of those panes of glass is the face of one of these black-eyed kids tapping at the window. And that image and that incident, it kind of pushed him over the edge. Paul ran into his bedroom. He retrieved his firearm. He came running back out. He told me that the only thing he could think of in those few seconds was that he wanted to terrify those kids the way they had frightened him. He yanked the door open, and there was nothing there. He searched his yard, the street, the driveway, everywhere. There was no sign of these kids anywhere. They had just vanished.
Does that represent a typical encounter?
It really does. In Paul's case, he saw a pair of children. The incidents usually range anywhere from 1 to 3 kids on average. But it has all of the common elements that we see in most of the cases. The solid black eyes, of course. There's a monotone speech that comes from these kids. It's almost, some people say it's almost droning. A lot of people feel that the children are attempting some type of mind control or hypnosis because they repeat the same phrases over and over and over again. And it's always a desire for something. It's always, invite me inside. Just ask me to come in. We're just kids. It won't take long. Very odd phrases. Their skin is usually described as being pale or pasty. Some people believe it looks artificial. And, of course, one of the startling elements, aside from the eyes, is the fact that these kids usually just vanish. Often the person will look away just for a few seconds, and when they turn back, these kids are gone.
Now, your book, who's the publisher?
Leprechaun Press.
Okay, it's called The Black-Eyed Children. How many witnesses do you have in this book?
Oh, gosh, I've got hundreds of cases in my files. Now, I don't know right off how many cases are in the book. The book is sort of structured so that it goes through a lot of the different phenomena that are associated with these kids that maybe can explain what they are, and the cases are ingrained in that. So, there's, for instance, a long chapter on the alien hybrid question,
right?
Which is probably the most popular theory to explain what these kids are.
Yeah. Well, in all of the cases that you've researched, did you come across any that went a sort of above and beyond this very, sort of general discussion? Did any of them actually say something or do something that might give us an idea of who or what they are?
There are unusual elements in some cases, but it usually doesn't come from the kids in terms of their language. Mostly what we hear is sort of an awkward use of language and odd phrases, and as I said, that are often repeated over and over and over again. Mm-hmm. I'll give you an example. What I consider one of the creepiest cases came out of Dallas, Texas, and it was a gentleman he came home from the store. He walked up to his front door, had a couple of bags in his hand. He puts his hand on the door and opens the door and has it swinging open. He suddenly realizes that there's a kid standing on the ground by the steps. Now, he swears this kid wasn't there just, seconds ago, but it's almost as if this child just appeared. He turns and he looks at this boy who is staring directly at him, and he sees the solid black eyes, the pale skin, this child looks at him and says, "Is it food time?" This gentleman's so stunned he can't even say anything. He's just sort of staring at this child. And, this child repeats the phrase, "I think it's food time. You should invite me inside." And, of course, we all know people just don't talk like that. So the other component of this case that's really fascinating is that it's one of the few accounts that, at least that I have found, where there was an animal present. And what happened was this gentleman had a 3-year-old pit bull that he had raised from a puppy. He heard this pit bull in the back of the house barking, and he could hear it running through the house because he has solid wood floors. He glanced into his front door. He has a long hallway that leads back to the living room. He saw the pit bull turn the corner, charging for the front door, just angry and at full bore. This dog ran towards the front door. When he almost reached the entrance, he put the brakes on. And you can imagine, a dog on a solid wood floor, it's the old Scooby-Doo thing. This animal he fell over himself onto the steps. He jumped up, head down, tail between his legs, whining, and ran back in the house. So when this dog got within range of that child, it went from a ferocious attack animal to just a cowering, whimpering dog that ran into the house, hid under the bed in the master bedroom, and wouldn't come out for days. Now, this gentleman seeing his dog act that way, it really kind of pushed him over the hedge. He ran in the house. He slammed the door. When he was telling me the story, he said, I've seen this dog take down rattlesnakes, snap them up and bite them in half. And he's never seen this animal afraid of anything.
Yeah, very
but now,
odd behavior.
All of a sudden, it's terrified of a child.
Yeah. Well, okay. Obvious question. Any of these sightings of these children involve additional sightings of UFOs, things like that?
A very small number. A very small number. It's interesting because when I look at a typical case, I always look at all of the correlations because one of my fascinations with the paranormal is, like these hot spots around the country that are concentrations of a high degree of activity, whether it's UFOs, cryptids, hauntings all across the board. And when I look at these cases, I always look for any kind of correlation in the area and within the individual's experience. And it just doesn't happen very often, which that in itself I think is kind of odd.
Yeah, it's telling in its own way. Well, okay, so let's get a picture of this. Where do most of these cases happen? Any particular place in the U.S.? Are they worldwide? Are there clusters?
They're worldwide at this point. And I think part of the reason for that is that over time, as more people have heard about this phenomenon, they come out and say, "Oh my gosh, that's what I saw." I can't tell you how many people have contacted me and said, "I had no idea. I thought I was the only one who had ever seen something like this."
Okay.
So they're telling their story, and their story, can be anywhere from a couple of weeks ago to years ago. But when I started studying the cases myself, the initial cluster that I saw was in the Midwest of this country. Over time, that has really spread out. I have a lot now from Texas, the West Coast, but then international cases have started to come in. So I've got a lot from the UK, and I've got cases from Canada, South Africa, Australia. It seems to be everywhere now.
Okay. Think these black-eyed children are dangerous or has an evil agenda?
Yes, I do. I think that they're sinister.
Why?
Because I have never heard an account that is a positive reflection or has positive results. The world kind of feels the hair go up on the back of his neck, and he's wondering what's going on here, and he's looking at this kid, and he realizes this kid has solid black eyes. Now, Harold is very frightened, and he's just thinking. He doesn't say anything. He's just thinking, how fast can I run away from this kid? And almost as if in an act of mind reading, this child immediately responds to him and says, now don't you run away from me.